Okay.
And did Karen? Karen? Called her. Okay.
You always get this much press at town council meetings?
Usually. Usually.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Good afternoon. My name is Bob Cunningham. I'm the supervisor in the town of Deerpark. And first of all, I'd like to welcome Mr. McCall, and we appreciate him taking the time to stop by here and talk to us. Basically, the questions that we have are from the assessors, I believe, and if they have those questions, they can ask them. If Mr. McCall would like to make some kind of a statement first, we'd appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here, and I appreciate your invitation. As my second stop, I just started off at Fort Jervis at the high school, where I had an opportunity to speak to a class of your high school students. And I must tell you, as you may or may not know, one of the jobs that I had before I became the controller, and the controller is an easy job compared to that one. I was the president of the Board of Education in New York City. And I think if any of you have been members of the Board of Education, you know, once you've done that, anything else after that's a piece of cake. So, but what I discovered meeting with your students is that they're very much like the students that I've been involved with. Students are inquisitive, they're very honest, they're very open, they're pretty tough too in terms of the kinds of questions they ask. And I just had a very exciting time with your students, and I want to commend you for the support you've given to public schools. You know, across the state, even in New York City where I come from, we've committed 25% of our budget to public education. And throughout the state of New York, a major commitment on the part of our towns and our villages and the state itself, the major commitment that we've made as a people has been to invest in education. And I just want to commend you for the investment you've made, the school that you have, and the kinds of students that you're producing. And it's an investment that we must continue to make. I appreciate the invitation and the introduction, Bob. And I think I'm here because I visit a lot of communities. I think people probably try to attach a particular significance to this visit here today. But I have visited since I've been controlling. It's only 6 months now. I've been in about 45 counties, and I've probably visited about 60 towns and villages because I do come from a big city. But I believe it's important if I'm going to represent all of the people of New York to really understand the issues and the needs and the problems faced by cities and towns of every size. So this is an opportunity for me to come and talk to you, and listen to you. I do represent the forces back in Albany, the people who are responsible for this, for the Empire State. And as your representative, I wanted this opportunity to come and meet some of you, particularly your elected officials. I have with me Tom Kelly, who's the chief examiner for this region for the Office of State Controller, and he probably will answer more questions than I will. But if you have issues that you'd like to discuss, if you have questions and comments and suggestions, you know, one of the things we've got to do in government is we've got to listen to people. We've got to get their sense of what we got to do. We've got to get their sense of what kinds of issues are important. So I'm not here to make speeches. I'm here to listen. I'm here to have the dialogue with you. I'll answer any questions that you have. But I'm also very open to your ideas and your suggestions and your direction in terms of the kinds of things we ought to be doing as we attempt to represent you in the state capital. Bob, you want to? Is any of the assessors here that would like to ask a question?
I think they had, the main question that they had was on the way the state is charging back for the information that we are supplying to the county and the state, which started a problem with us. Josephine, could you expound on that a little bit? Maybe you could. Okay.
supervisors, assessors, councilmen. That whole hearing process went through, all the people were heard, and the state division requested that the state board adopt the rules as proposed. In other words, we weren't heard. So I think that's really what the major issue is. And we're standing our ground, and we plan to stand our ground. And if we're going to do work that is the responsibility of the state, then our municipalities must be reimbursed for that.
Anybody else want to comment on it before I respond? Well, first of all, I appreciate that, because I did not fully understand what the issue is, and I certainly do now. Let me begin by saying that this is not an issue that emanates from my office.
Sure,
That's clear. So anything that's happened here is not the result of any action that I've taken. And I think it is, and I think you put your finger on it, it is typical of actions taken by state agencies, which maybe we should just move this. It's typical of what happens with state agencies who do and run. And one of the things that we're talking about in Albany, we must insist on, not only in Albany, but at the federal level, that if we're going to pass on responsibilities or mandates to localities, we've got to provide the wherewithal the funds to carry them out. And that's part of the problem that we have throughout the state, whether it's Medicaid, or whether it's certain educational requirements, or requirements to build courts or maintain our courts. If we're going to pass these mandates on the localities, we've got to pass on the resources to carry them out. And I'm really shocked that the Division of Equalization and Assessment did in fact have hearings and heard from you, but then went ahead and took this action anyway. And what can I do? I will go to the division, I will tell them about your attitudes, and I will support your view. I mean, your position is very meritorious. You can't expect localities to carry out this function if they don't have the resources to do it. If you want it done, if you want it done right, then the resources must be made available. So I support that completely, and it's unfortunate. It is not under my direct supervision. It's the controller. I think you all know some of the responsibilities of my office. If not, I will outline them for you. Can I do that? Because that's something that, I tell a story. I think some of you know how I got this job. What happened was Ned Reagan, who was been the controller for 14 years, resigned. And according to the Constitution, the legislature is supposed to meet the successor. So that's how I got the job. I was selected by the legislature. And I went around and talked to just about all 210 legislators. And do you know what they talked to me about when I came to tell them I wanted to be controller? The major concern that they all had was that their travel vouchers get reimbursed more expeditiously. So as far as they're concerned, I'm the person who approves the travel vouchers. Can I just take a couple minutes to tell you about my office, and that might help frame the discussion. I have three functions. First of all, I'm the chief fiscal officer of the state. I pay all the bills, I approve all the contracts, all of the expenditures for any state expense have to come through my office and have to be approved by my office. That is, we pre-audit every state expense. So that's one function. The second function that I have is that I'm the chief auditor of the state. I'm responsible for auditing all state agencies. I'm responsible for auditing any program or any organization that receives state money. And I'm responsible for auditing the 1,600 towns, villages, and cities across New York. We haven't had an audit in Deerpark since when?
We were here last in 1991. We'll be here next year on a schedule. We have a 3-year schedule to try to get to all these 1,600 units of local government. And Deerpark is scheduled in 1994.
So that's another function. We have to do that for all 1,600 municipalities. The third function that I have is I serve as the sole trustee of the state pension fund. And there are 880,000 members in the fund, 220,000 retirees who get a check from me every month. So I have to provide information and services to those 880,000 members. In addition, as the sole trustee, I'm responsible for the investment of the pension funds, so that those monies will be invested prudently, invested without risk, invested in ways to bring about the highest possible return for those of us who will depend upon the pension funds when we retire. And the pension fund's been well managed. We will continue to manage it well. We will continue to invest prudently. I reported just about a week ago that the return on the pension fund for the last year has been 12.5%, which is a very good return. And in fact, the pension fund just went through a major battle where we came out victorious. And this is the so-called Tuck decision. I don't know if you've heard of it. What happened was in 1990, in order to balance the budget, the governor and the legislature basically raided the pension fund. And they changed the method by which localities in the state contribute to the pension fund. And as a result of that change in the method, over the last 3 years, the state and the localities have made no contribution to the pension fund. The unions, on behalf of the retirees, went to court to challenge that. And I went to court and supported them because it was not only unconstitutional, it was unconscionable. The fact is that that money in the pension fund is there for the benefit of the retirees. The pension fund is not a slush fund or rainy day fund for the state. It's not there to bail the state out when it needs money. And we won in court. That's the good news. The bad news is since we won in court, I now have the responsibility of recovering the $3 billion that should have been contributed to the pension fund by the state and the localities over the last 3 years. Now, you and I know what that means. The state and the localities don't have $3 billion to put back into the fund. So I am working out a system because I don't want to further damage the state's and the localities' fragile budget situation. So I am attempting to work out a process which I will announce next week where they will phase in the repayments. But you know what that's all about? That's another responsibility I have. To talk about the need for fiscal stability and not to resort to gimmicks in order to balance the budget or to manage our fiscal affairs. Because this was a gimmick. It got us through 1990, but now look at the price we're going to have to pay for it. We now have to come up with $3 billion, which we do not have. So that's my job, to manage the pension fund, to protect the pension fund, and to make sure it's there when the retirees want it. So those are the things that happen. Those are my major responsibilities as the controller. But what you're talking about falls under my responsibility too, because if we're going to have fiscal stability and act responsibly, we can't impose these kinds of mandates and treat localities the way you tell me the division has acted. So I will meet with them. I will convey your concerns to them. Maybe we ought to do what we did with the pension fund. Maybe we ought to sue them. Maybe that's a recourse. If the division is treating localities in such a inappropriate fashion and really imposing hardships that you can't manage, maybe that's a recourse.
My response to that would be that clearly I think the municipality that would formulate a suit would probably be a winner. Unfortunately, for a town or a small municipality to sue the giant New York State is taking a burden that they could never clearly follow that suit through if it were appealed and so on. The cost to that municipality would be just monumental.
Well, what about the association, like the Association of Counties, or New York Council of Mayors, or some of the associations that represent all of our communities? Maybe we should talk to them about it. Do you know if they've taken any position on this issue?
Oh, New York, I'm sorry, go ahead.
My name is Andrea Nylon, and I'm also involved in the New York State Assessors Association. First of all, I want to thank you for coming, and I also want to thank you for your communication. As a possible retiree at some point, I certainly like to hear what you're saying, and certainly we need our money managed properly, and I think that's an extremely important role. As far as working with other organizations, we do work in conjunction very closely with the Association of Towns. In fact, I sit on the Resolutions Committee. And in fact, the topic that you just spoke about, the $3 billion, certainly came up as an issue because it is something that will have to be put back, and everybody realizes that, and it also is a burden. And I think that brings up the whole problem with the money and where is it coming from. I think the taxpayer certainly needs to be considered in whatever we do, and certainly localities need to be reimbursed for any information that the state uses. However, we have to be very concerned over duplication of effort, duplication of charging the same taxpayer for maybe the same service. And so it needs to be streamlined in a fashion that everybody's comfortable with, where nobody is bearing an unequal burden. And I think that's the real problem, is nobody's been able to find that. Many of the assessors, before this rule was proposed, in fact, the majority of the assessors were willingly complying with providing information necessary to do the job that the state needed to do, because we recognize the fact that for the past several years, the state too has been suffering in their budget. So we were trying to comply as best we can to eliminate duplication. And for some reason, through their frustration or whatever, they decided that we should be pushed a little further, instead of it being voluntary, to have this be mandatory. And quite frankly, this isn't the first time that this type of thing has happened. And in fact, I just came from a meeting where Senator Larkin was present, and as chairman of the local government committee for the Senate, he's very concerned about money and where it's coming from. And E&A is proposing legislation to require an additional filing fee when they file a deed in New York State. Each deed is required to have a state information form that are known as the EA 5217, and there's currently a $25 filing fee. They are trying to raise that filing fee, and I don't think that's the answer. In fact, the Senate restored $1 million to E&A last year to do the very job that they're asking us to do. So I think they're being given the money, and I don't know how they're using it, and I don't know what the answer is. And quite frankly, we've been working on the problem. We've talked to them, we've met with them, spent untold volunteer hours as an association, working not only with them but other organizations who are equally frustrated, by the way, and who have taken positions on these issues. And I guess maybe this, as Kurt said before, this whole frustration is what's coming. You know, we were kind of trying to handle it ourselves as assessors, and now we're going to our town fathers and saying, hey, you know, we need some help here. We can't do this. It's not just us. We may be the basis on which the tax is levied, but it's not just our responsibility. It's everybody's. So I appreciate you coming down. And anything that you can do. Incidentally, there is a meeting in New York City Tuesday. The board will be meeting. This issue had been tabled to that meeting, and so that is when they're going to make their decision. And from what I understand, they are going to pass it. So time is of the essence.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm glad you thank you, and I'm glad you mentioned the legislature, because we need to talk to them, because the legislature provides the funding for E&A. And, you know, that provides some leverage. I mean, they could possibly impose some restraints on E&A. So I will talk to Senator Larkin and other members of the legislature if they can they might be helpful. You mentioned the Association of Towns. Has that association taken any position on this issue?
Yes, they were supposed to have. Now, I haven't actually seen them, but I did talk to them when we had a resolutions committee meeting, and they were to put in a resolution to the board. I would say they're going to have it read at that meeting.
Well, that's helpful. Thank you for telling me about the meeting. Yes, sir.
I know that the part of what you talked about, your responsibilities were on the audits of the communities.
Right.
I've had a chance to see some audits of various communities in Orange County. A number of times recommendations are made, and it's noted that recommendations were made in previous audits and nothing was done about it. What can be done by your office to help the towns who are more than likely lay people without maybe the expertise that your staff would have, to help them get into compliance with your recommendations and to help them do a more efficient job in putting their budgets together and operating?
Yes, that's a major priority of my office. One of the things that I've tried to do is to change our approach to auditing from this fashion. I think an audit ought to be a management tool that tries to help us do a better job. I don't think an audit ought to be a matter of simply pointing the finger and saying you found that you're doing something wrong. And one of the things I've changed is, and you might have noticed this yourself, in the past, some of the press releases that accompanied the audits were rather inflammatory. They didn't always reflect what was in the audit, and that became the issue rather than the substance of the audits. So what we're trying to do is focus on the substantive issues that we discover, and then to try to be helpful to the locality in terms of fixing the problem. We want to identify problems, but then we want to help fix them. So we're now attempting to be more involved in providing technical assistance to localities in terms of showing them how the problems can be fixed by putting new internal controls in place or other procedures. Also, as you know, we provide training for just as you said, the lay people who get elected to towns and end up as the town treasurer or the town clerk or the town chamberlain. And often these people don't have it. So we, in conjunction with New York Council of Mayors, have a variety of programs and service institutes for local officials.
Does your office don't have the resources? I don't know. It seems like more follow-ups needed. I caught a couple of these reports where literally, you know, we made this recommendation in 89, we
years
made
ago,
it in 91, now we're back in
Yeah.
93.
Well, we don't have all the resources necessary. We're a state agency. We too are dependent on the legislature for our funding. But we're trying to retrain our staff to help them to be more helpful in that respect. We will be pressuring the legislature for more money to do that. And we're getting a lot of support from the towns and other communities who say this is what they need from us. And I appreciate your bringing that up, but it is the direction in which I'm trying to take this office.
If I can just make a comment along those lines, that since I'm taking over supervising Deerpark in January, certainly hearing there's an audit coming up in '94 piques my interest, I should say. And I just want to say that the transition, working with Bob, has certainly been helpful, but the information that I've been able to get from your office in the form of guidelines and general practices and principles has certainly been extremely helpful in the transition, and I certainly look forward to working with your office more.
Well, we're here to help, and we will provide whatever information or resources we can. And that's really what our job ought to be. You know, as I said, the auditing is after the fact. I mean, what we want to do is be available and helpful up front, so you don't develop the kind of problems that become the substance of negative audit. Sure, please.
I'd like to add to your comment. One of the things the controller has done was change the format of our reports that we issue to emphasize this new partnership, and to also to change the focus perhaps that has been given to the findings that were given to municipalities, which you indicated have been repeated. And that is to highlight not just what we found and what the conditions were, but what our recommendation is. And also, there's been an addendum placed in the report so you know who to contact. In the past, the examiner may have been there, the report has been issued, and now you've got to wait until somebody comes again. You may not know who to contact in Albany, which you may be transferred all over. Now the numbers of our 7 regional offices, as well as the deputy controller from municipal affairs, are listed, as well as the phone numbers and the addresses where you could contact the person for your particular municipality. Mr. Decker mentioned new supervisors coming in. One of the things the controller does is put on a training school for new supervisors every January of the year following the election, to try to help up front so that we can get off on the right foot into a very difficult job.
Questions, comments, suggestions? Yes, sir.
I'm sure that there's no need for me to say we appreciate you coming, but we all do. My name is Nicholas DeMarco, and I'm from Deerpark. And I have a personal problem, which I'm sure there's many people in Deerpark and throughout the state have. And it seems that the section that you control handles the money of the state, which I believe that somehow indirectly or directly involves you. I've lived here over 12 years. I came here on disability, so wherever I worked was before I worked for a living, and I didn't have the problem that I have now. Well, I figure I have a problem. The thing is, filing our income tax. Now, I'm sure there's many people in this town that are in the same position I am, that we pay no state income tax. But yet the state forces us to send in a form, have it filled out, which I'm sure there's a lot of people like myself that are not capable of filling out these forms. So I have to pay to have it done. Then the state has to pay to go through it. And I think it's a waste of the state's money and my money. And I think that maybe there's something you can do about it. I've spoken to some of our representatives, and they don't seem to be able to do it.
What was your thought about how the state would determine that you don't have to make a payment if you don't file the form. How would that be determined?
Well, like I said, I have lived here about 12 years, so I filed for 12 years. Now, seeing as I have the same income every year, if I don't pay taxes for 10 years or 5 years or 15 years, I'm sure the state can surmise that I'm never going to pay the income tax.
Especially with the lottery.
You know, if I hit the lottery, then
They'll take it out right off the top.
we won't worry about it. But like I said, it's not myself. I'm sure many, many people in this town, which is primarily of retired people, people that are unable to take care of themselves and so forth. And the average salary around here is only maybe $16,000 a year. So I'm sure it can make a lot more people than myself. If there's anything you can do or look into it, I'm sure we would all appreciate it.
Okay, well, thank you. I have not heard that issue, and I would. And maybe there's a reasonable way of doing that. For instance, if you suggested, perhaps if a person doesn't pay over a certain period of time, then you could assume that, and maybe they could, eliminate the filing. I will talk to the tax commissioner about that. If there's a way to do that, we'll see. But thank you for bringing
I'm
it to
sure
my
I
attention.
appreciate it and everyone else.
Okay. Any other questions, comments, suggestions, recommendations? Yes, sir.
My name is John McCall, resident of Deerpark. I just have a comment. You mentioned when I believe it was the governor that took the funds to be used.
Well, it was the legislature passed it and the governor signed it, so they were all involved in the process.
Another thing he did, which to me is positive for the outcome of this area here, he sold the Route 84 to the US 2 road. And by this new governor, we have a lot better highways than we did across this county because of that. We had a highway that was 20 years old, and to go across it, aged the car 5 years. You know? We've seen a lot of good come out of some of those moves that the government made.
No, I-
Incidentally, Ned Reagan was very, talk about negative about some of the things the government did. He was very strongly against that move. I kind of miss some of the negative things I see.
Well, I'll try to get some negative things. Thank you, and I will convey that to the governor. Are there any other questions, comments? Well, I want to, again, Bob, Wayne, really all of you, thank you for inviting me here, and I hope you'll invite me back. I need this. You know, we have to come out, talk to real people, and listen to them, and get some sense of what people are thinking about. And I know you have this specific problem, and it doesn't fall in my office, but you can be assured that I will do all that I can to engage it and to talk to the people in the division and talk to the members of the legislature. If we can find some relief, we certainly will. And I think you all know how to reach me, and if there's any other thing that I should know about, if you